Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local.
Yep. And so now we turn to Mike Blumenthal for the most exciting session or segment of this Season 2, Episode 3 broadcast.
I don't know if it's the most exciting, but it is the most uplifting or positive, which is not my normal style. I like to pick the Debbie Downer stories
dystopian,
of the week. But
big tech surveillance state. Yeah.
Right. So this one was from Mike Boland at Street Fight. How will the metavearth materialize? And
did you spell that with the TH?
What's that?
Did you spell that with the TH?
Metavearth, V-E-A-R-T-H.
Yeah.
V-E-A-R-T-H. So let's hope that name does not take on any permanence. It's a terrible name, hard to pronounce, and although I suppose it does reflect some of the dystopian possibilities. But what was interesting about the article was not so much about the future and the sort of the clickbait email lead-in that they used about the future, but really what Niantic is doing now. One, they have developed this Lightship platform, which unlocks the real-world metaverse as a development environment for others to use, which I think offers a lot of possibility over the next 2 to 3 years in terms of extracting value from real-world interactions through something. Through your phone.
It's very smart. It's very smart for those guys to do that.
And this is Niantic Labs, right? From John Hankey, the founder of Google, or one of the original creators of Google Maps and Google Earth.
Right. So building this SDK, a software development kit for geolocal AR experiences is really interesting to me. They also have the sponsorship platform that allows businesses to buy positioning as in-game waypoints so that they can create Pokemon hatches at their location. And what was interesting was that 73% of players deviate from regular walking routes, sometimes to sponsored locations, to achieve in-game milestones. 84% interact with commercial locations and 58% transact. And they did some they mentioned some real world stats from SK Telecom, which is in Taiwan. They saw a 10.8% boost in loyalty signups during scheduled raids around Pokemon releases at their locations. And 7-Eleven saw a 10.5% revenue lift from in-game raids. It stimulated around thousands of locations in Taiwan and Mexico and other regions. So what was interesting about this was mostly its grounding in what's real now and what's happening. And I think Niantic is interesting because they've taken the base map layer, which is really designed around roads, of whether you use Apple's or Google's, and added to it this whole layer of geometry that's based on where people go and what they see. And in that have created a technology which seems less dystopian than Mark Zuckerberg's metaverse. Although I suppose one could argue that gamifying life might be equally dystopian in the end. But it was interesting because it's what's happening today.
So the study took place in Taiwan. So SK Telecom is South Korea, I think, but you're saying the study was in Taiwan?
Yes, the loyalty boost was in Taiwan.
So, and these were all sort of in the context of the Pokemon Go game, or
the sponsorship within the game, yes, and releasing Pokemon characters at the location, so they had to come to the location to gain a character and get game points.
Well, it is fascinating what they've done with location. I mean, Hankey obviously is his history is in mapping and location, and the early games that they created, Ingress, before Pokemon Go, and then I forget there was a more informational. It wasn't a game per se. It was like using AR and the real world. It was an informational thing that they created initially before that. So he's very, very steeped in all of this, obviously, and I think that it's a pretty interesting platform that will get adoption. The question, and this is certainly much more immediate and potentially mainstream than the totally immersive VR metaverse, or metavearth, I should say. But you know, Snap. We talked earlier about Snap, right? So Snap is the most mainstream example of AR that's out there because people are using the filters, and you know, there are companies using Snap to create an AR layer on top of some you know, real world thing object, and I think that's pretty interesting. And so it's kind of incremental, and we'll see it become pretty mainstream. And it'll be used as a marketing tool, but it's not the total immersion product that most people are thinking about, like the Activision Blizzard acquisition by Microsoft, the $70 billion or $75 billion or whatever the number was, acquisition. You know, people are placing big bets on this complete immersion kind of experience, and I think the AR version that you described has more realistic opportunity both will coexist, but AR is going to be more mainstream, I think.
Right. And AR is more relevant and local from my point of view. I mean, I think that there's it lends itself to real world interactions at a local level.
Well, early on, sorry, go ahead, Mike.
That the metaverse doesn't, right? It's like, I have very little interest of going to a metaverse cocktail party and interacting with metaverse characters in some ballroom. This is not, this isn't going to happen.
Well, there's also
that's the Second Life model, right? I mean,
yeah. So there's also the Second Life. There's, so I was years ago. I worked at Tech TV, and we would do these Friday afternoon live chat things, and everybody had an avatar, and it was just on the computer, and everybody would come into some virtual room that had a background, and there were all these sort of floating little avatars, and we would text, and there was I think there was a voice component where the moderator and speakers had some voice, but there's that model too, where
then there's the model where we just change out our background so it looks like we're at the Oregon beach, but we're really in downtown gritty Portland.
One of us truly is at the Oregon beach, and it's not me.
But it isn't me.
I mean, I think we didn't talk about the Meta patent, the patent filings that Facebook / Meta became public, and what that signifies for advertising in the metaverse. I mean, I think that's pretty interesting as well. Do you want to say anything about that?
I thought we were trying to stay away from the dystopian big tech surveillance topic.
Too late. Exactly. I brought it up. The upshot of it was that they would follow your eyes to determine what you were looking at in the metaverse to determine the advertising they would show you. So, right, if we don't want to end on a downer, we can't talk about that in too much depth.
Yeah, I think it's pretty interesting though, and I think that what we talked about at the beginning. I mean, if these privacy rules become more strict and more prevalent, that will really challenge those kinds of business models, I think. But
it's contextual within the metaverse, though. Maybe it's a contextual advertising.
Well, are your eye movements personal data? Philosophical question.
One would hope so. One would hope that is very personal. So.
Well, so early on, you may or may not remember Yelp and couple other folks. I'm blanking on who else did sort of AR style overlays. Yelp had a thing called Monocle where you could point the camera at a restaurant down the street and you could see the Yelp score. And I think OpenTable did something also along those lines with AR. And they were just very awkward experiences, not very helpful. But now, I think it is getting to the point where you can, and Google Lens envisions this, where you can sort of hold the camera at a place and get information about the place. And I think that could be quite useful in certain circumstances, So I think that the AR scenario could be helpful. But the Pokemon Go business, even though there's a lot of money there, I think is not a mainstream use case.
Right. But the SDK, the software development kit that allows their platform to be developed into a broad range of tools, offers, given their example and their use, offers a potential future pathway to get there. And that's interesting.
Absolutely. So on a kind of middle brow note of interesting, I think we've run out of time today. we always strive to end on an optimistic note, despite all the dystopian forces swirling around us. So everybody, have a good weekend, have a good week whenever you're listening to this. Don't forget to sign up for the newsletter, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.